is Game Master's Toolbox, and today we are going to be talking about 10 things that could ruin your game. These are mistakes that Game Masters often make. We're going to talk a little bit about each of the mistakes, what they mean to your game, and how they are interfering with the fun your groups might be having, and provide you with some insight on how to avoid these problems going forward. Before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe and hit all the buttons down below so the algorithm knows that you're part of our audience.
Absorbing damage is the name of your game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so we're going to be talking about 10 common mistakes that game masters make, and these mistakes are natural, they are expected, and are as common as dirt. But the trick is that we have to really recognize them and nip them in the bud so they don't keep problem going on session after session. So today we're going to be looking at each one, and near the end we're going to come back to one really key important step that will make every game exciting. So we'll come to that at the end. But before that, let's get to going on these various mistakes that game masters make. All right, so the first mistake that game masters often make is to over-explain. You're excited about the adventure you've written, you've done all the research, you've gotten the maps ready, you've prepared for all of the possible interactions that the players might have, and man, you want to share. And the problem with this concept of oversharing or over-explaining is that you literally take from the players the wonder and mystery they might have of discovering these very things that you are pointing out. One of the biggest challenges is that we are so excited about what we have to say and what we've gathered that we want to make sure that we don't forget, or we don't want to ignore the pieces that we've wanted to include. But this process of over-explaining fundamentally takes away the mystery and the wonder that the players otherwise might have derived. And so this can be problematic. And of course, the resolution is to learn fundamentally to not only play the notes of the music, so to speak, but also to learn to play the spaces. The very places that you leave information out are the places that the players will investigate and discover on their own. So by limiting your explanation, you actually improve your player interaction scene after scene. The second challenge is that you will often telegraph to your players the importance of your non-player characters even before they are on the scene. A great example is to be able to differentiate between those individuals that might be window dressing compared to those that might be story elements. And the irony is that because we are trying to focus on the players, we tend to build out more detail about the individuals that the players will interact with than we will with the happenstance passers-by that they might have engaged with. And so it's important to, instead of telegraphing which characters are important and which ones are not, that we treat all NPCs as if they live in the world, and therefore the players have the opportunity to engage with them. And when you telegraph, you literally are telling the players which NPCs to interact with and which ones to avoid, and that problem manifests itself session after session to the point where the players begin to identify, even before they engage with them, which NPCs are important and which ones are not. And this steals some of the wonder and the thunder of the session and causes the players to not only identify where the information is coming from, but begin to expect it. And the problem with that is it makes the adventure not nearly as exciting or interesting as it was when they weren't sure who was bringing the information. So establish your NPCs, but do so in a fashion that doesn't telegraph too much about them, so that the players actually get the experience of engaging with them. The next is what I call burying the lead. And this is when you've got some critical information that the players need to get. You've built out your story, you've got your NPCs, you even know which NPC will be providing this information. You've done all that homework, but now you're so interested in the interaction with the NPC that you fundamentally downplay or perhaps forget what was important about that interaction, and therefore the players either miss out altogether on what you were trying to say, or more particular, you undermine the excitement and the thrill level of it by downplaying it. And I understand why this happens, because when you're a storyteller and you've got something that the players need to know, some earth-shattering piece of information, you don't want to give it away. You don't want to provide it to the players as a cast-off. You want it to be something important. So you downplay it, but that in essence undervalues it, and therefore the players miss the lead, miss the trigger that the player represented. So the way to avoid this is to make sure that you are aware of, from the NPC's standpoint, why they are going to be sharing the information and why it's important to them as well as to the players that the players discover this information. The next real way to ruin a game is to downplay the wins. Your adventurers struggle and work hard, each of your adventures, to pursue the story, to engage with the NPCs you've provided them, and to really sink their teeth into the story. But there is a tendency to build on the gravitas, the intensity of the story, and completely miss the part that is actually enjoyable for the players. The feeling of denouement, this feeling of completion that comes upon them when they've successfully accomplished something within the game. So make sure that you don't downplay the wins. You revel with the players in what they've accomplished and draw attention to how valuable that was to the overall ambiance and the cast of the stories, and build them up in terms of valuation so that they see the outcome of their successes in a very tangible way. This really is important, especially when you have a larger games group, that they don't get lost in the folds, so to speak, of your story. I get the fact that when you've got a larger group, you have many different threads that are running alongside, but you don't want to undermine one group objective under the benefits of another, but instead you want to amplify the effectiveness of their successes. And this gives the players a valuation to what they've done, an acknowledgement of the effort. And by playing up their victories, you give them a reason to continue pressing on to other objectives. Yes, they certainly can have chronological ramifications, and yes, you might have an intense storyline, but don't forget to give credit where it's due so that your players will feel the valuation of their experience in the game. Now, one of the other challenges that game masters will often screw up is the idea of overcommitting. And this happens a couple of different ways. You can overcommit in terms of how much you think can be accomplished in a given time period in a certain game session. You may have calculated that to travel from Potiphar to Florin, for example, is going to take 8 to 10 days. And as the adventure goes on, Perhaps you get stuck into a combat situation, or perhaps there were some injuries along the way that have slowed the players so they're not able to get to the objective by the time you originally planned. It becomes problematic when you try to overcommit. You decide you're going to throw 3 or 4 adventures into the same time frame, 2 or 3 encounters of a extensive length that run into each other at particular times in the game can cause not only for you a level of stress trying to get everything accomplished, but also to put pressure on the players to attempt things that feel forced when you do this. And this overcommitment can also occur when you've dedicated to run a short campaign, 4 to 6 weeks, and the adventure is taking longer. The players have engaged. They're having fun, but they've engaged in ways that have intentionally slowed the adventure. Realize that one of the ways you can avoid this issue of overcommitment is to recognize the fact that you're taking longer and give that opportunity to players to really grasp and pursue what they want to, even if it means you have to extend your campaign by 1 or 2 sessions. Make sure that you provide the players enough time to accomplish the things you want to without overcommitting, because the players, if they are put in an overcommitment situation, will start to feel not connected or not part of the story, and they will see the places that the adventure is falling apart and no longer hold the interest for them. And this process of overcommitment can actually drive your players away from the story and away from the interconnection that we would all hope for them to have. Now, this one I'm very guilty of, and be careful not to outsmart yourself. I have written adventures and had an adventure go 3 or 4 weeks, and I've set up a puzzle and I've set up the mystery and I've gotten all the pieces together so that the players have everything they need to solve the puzzles. I've provided them all of the clues, and literally I've outsmarted myself. Either I overestimated what the players could gather, or perhaps I've missed a critical piece of the puzzle, so therefore they don't have what's necessary for them to accomplish it. It could even be a situation where you misstated the puzzle at some point and the players are working with improper information. This process really is only overcome when you as the game master are able to acknowledge the fact that you foiled yourself, that you've put the problems out there that simply can't be solved. Perhaps you can retrofit some of the mission pieces so that they can have a better opportunity. Maybe you want to walk through your logic. In any way that you want to accomplish that, realize that it does take a commitment or an acknowledgement of your own foibles so that you can undo the problems that the outsmarting of yourself has caused. One of the best benefits of such an outsmarting is that it lets the players see your humanity and the error of your own hubris, and it really helps to make you a more human player and provides the community, the players at your table, the opportunity to poke a little fun at you. So make sure that you release your ego on this and step back into the world of the living, so to speak, and take the licks that are necessary, because in order to overcome an outsmarting of yourself, you have to become more human and give them the pieces they need to solve the puzzles. Alrighty. Now this one is really common, especially if you're running a long tail, and especially if you're running multiple sessions a week, as I am. When you have 6, 8, 10 adventure groups, there are a lot of stories, a lot of elements that are running parallel to one another. And sometimes they're actually directly in pursuit of one another. And it's easy to lose your space. So it's important to always, if you can, if at any way possible, do a after session debrief and remind yourself and refresh yourself where you left off, and make sure you take ample notes on what's going on so this doesn't happen. Now, again, just like in the case of outsmarting yourself, if you lose your place in the story, it can have a devastating effect. For example, in the case that I mentioned earlier, in the adventuring traveling from Potiphar to Florin, I was convinced in my mind that the players had made it already to Florin, so I built all the adventures for that coming week in the city of Florin. But what I had failed to remember was that the players actually were delayed and were actually still in the city of Potiphar. So all the adventures that I'd set up that would be particular to the locality of that Western Kingdom, I now had to figure out how to make the story make sense in Potiphar. And we've had conversations before about the concept of the quantum ogres. And yes, it's possible to move a story element from one place to another, but you have to maintain consistency and coherency so that anything that gets moved can now make sense in the new location. And doing so is again going to be a matter of ego to tell the players, oh, hey, this is going to be a little jerky today because I intended for you to be in Florin. I forgot that we were still in Potiphar, so give me a few minutes to get my bearings, because you need to reestablish where you are in the story, even as you connect to the players and where they are in the story as well. One of the biggest challenges that a game master can have when he is running a game is he can actually ruin it by phoning it in. And by this, I mean coming to the session confident that you have everything down, confident that you're aware of where all the pieces are, and not doing any of the work of establishing the characters in their locales, making sure that your NPCs are, screwed in tight, so to speak. Make sure that you've got a compelling adventure set for the players. The biggest problem with phoning it in isn't necessarily the first time, because it can happen from time to time where you just don't feel up to it, or you just don't have the gravitas to carry forward. But the challenge with phoning it in is that if you fall into a pattern of doing this session after session, or even only periodically, you can lead your players to believe that you don't have any, you don't extend any value to their gameplay. And if you aren't willing to do the endeavoring work to make your sessions enjoyable, why should they? And I have seen games groups fall apart simply on this basis, because a game master got used to running and was there every week and had the one or two monsters and everything was the same. But the problem with it was always the same. And so make sure that instead of falling into this trap, make sure that you take a few minutes at the beginning of every session, reestablish why you're there, what we're doing, how many objectives you're trying to accomplish, so that the players will feel your connection, because when you're connected, they will be as well. All right, and this also leads into the next part of this, which is the idea of when you are playing with a group, even if everything is going perfectly and you've run for several weeks, it can be kind of a burden when the players are no longer connected to the story for some reason, whether it be an NPC that was out of alignment a few weeks ago, or whether an encounter didn't go the way they would want, or items were lost. There's all kinds of reasons why the players might be disconnecting, but it's really important to remember to debrief and check in with your players periodically, whether it's every session or every other session. Make sure that you're connected to what they are doing and why they're doing it, because it's really essential that your players feel the value of what you're doing. And when you yourself fall away and don't check in, it's in those moments that things can arise that you may not even be aware of. And by utilizing the check-in, utilizing the debrief, you can find the problems and help to resolve them before they become full-blown. when we are dealing with situations, it's really important not to act upon assumptions. You know the old saw, don't get involved with assumptions because it makes an ass out of you and umptions. Yeah, I get the joke. But the reality is that your players play for their particular reasons, and you need to know what those are and how they interact so that you can provide them with the resources they're looking for in the game, and therefore not find yourself with players that are dissatisfied. And one of the easiest ways you can cause dissatisfaction is to assume and make directional plans based on what you think might be happening. And so it's important to not take for granted the way that, players interact, but instead focus on what's important to the players every session. Because when you are engaged and part of the game with your players, you will have a greater impact on the fun of the game and get more accomplished. Alrighty, and then finally, parting shots, let me ask you a question. What do you do with your games groups to keep problems from happening? Now, I will admit there is one really key element to keeping your games enjoyable, far greater than any of the others that I've recommended tonight, and that is to remain a continuous part of the game. Yes, the story you've created is itself a character in the story, and so you want to engage with that, but to a greater point, you want to make sure that what is happening in the story meets the demands of what you've intended for the interaction. And this is really the key to any campaign. If you are running a sandbox or running a very tight railroad, in either case, you need to actually keep your fingers on the tab of what's going on in the game so that the players feel that engagement, because that is what the players are there to enjoy. The game is the collective, not just you and the story that you've built, not just them and the objectives that they have, but the combined community and how you are all engaging. I want to thank you for being here today, and make sure you leave comments for us on how your games run. Ask any questions you would like. I'm going to be doing an Ask Me Anything in the next couple of days. And do remember we are getting ready to launch the Kickstarter tour, and that everything is going to kick off the 1st of June. So if you have any questions, make sure you leave the comments down below, and join us at nikosrpg.com for more information. Have a great day, and remember what my grandfather always says, that was enough work, now go play.